JP, you've been associated with the Poetry Society right from its inception. We have covered 25 years together in the Poetry Society. Of course, I wasn't there at that time. So, being one of the founder members of the Poetry Society of India, tell us, why was it so important to establish this Poetry Society?
Actually, I should start at the beginning. And we used to have many poetry programs in Delhi, but there was no organization looking after such programs, and there was no place where poets could meet. I mean, there was organizations like the Sahitya Academy for literature in general, but there was no special organization or association for poets. So some friends of ours, poets, we sat together and thought, of course, Mr. Kaul was behind the whole idea. Then we thought we'll form a society, poetry society, like there are poetry societies, many other countries, like in England there's several poetry societies, America also there are several societies. So we thought that we'll float a poetry society. And to start with, we were the founder members, 8 of us, and we had Mr. Keshav Malik, then Mr. Kaul, then Mr. Manmohan Singh, Dr. Lakshmi, Kannan, Sunita Jain, Priya Devi, and Balu Rao. I mean, sadly, we have already lost Manmohan Singh and Balu Rao. And the Poetry Society is now more than 25 years old. And last year, we had the 25th year Silver Jubilee celebrations for the Poetry Society. And it was organized in quite a grand scale, in the sense that 25 colleges had poetry readings on that particular day of the 25th year of the Poetry Society.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I remember that.
Remember that.
And we're still celebrating. The other day, Dr. Kalam had come. So celebrations are on till 24th of August.
Yes, it will go on, but this is also the first time that we introduce a new program called the annual lecture, and we were lucky to get Abdul Kalam for this program, and we had a very successful program on that occasion.
And why do you think it's important to have these annual lectures? I mean, what would they do for our Poetry Society?
For one thing, it will bring poetry to the mind of the people. I mean, one normal course of one's life, one is not worried about poetry. But once such an event happens, and on the last occasion with Mr. Kalam giving the first annual lecture, it was a huge crowd, and in the IIC, and the hall was full, and that is screening outside also, which was also watched by a large number of people. And it also makes news, which is important. So I think it's a good idea to have such an annual lecture, besides the poetry readings.
So this is a very good way to promote poetry and to give it its due place in fine arts. Because in earlier days, if you go back to centuries, poetry was always thought to be right on top of fine arts. And in today's date, we find it right at the bottom. So why do you think there's been this decline? And what is the role that poetry can play to improve the values of the society, the thinking, and also to harness the finer feelings and bring that finesse to a personality? Why is it that it is being so neglected? As a poet, and that too a well-known poet, I'm sure you would have reflected on that.
Yes, I have reflected. I have spoken about it also. Actually, I have a poem on poetry, in that I start with a line called, the first line says, nobody reads poetry. That is how I start. But I don't remember all the lines, but it ends saying that nobody reads poetry. To come to think of it, I compare poetry with life and all that. So at the end I say that nobody reads poetry, but come to think of it, what is life itself but some stray lines of an obscure poem, some such thing. So which means life is like a poem also. And about the importance of poetry in the society, I think it has been said that poetry makes nothing happen, so things like that. And certainly
Poet makes nothing happen.
poetry makes nothing happen. So
do you believe in that?
So I believe to the extent that it cannot immediately stop terrorism or police bullets or something, but poetry has a big role in the sense that poetry or literature as such can record what is happening in society, and that's very, very important. So even if we cannot give a solution to a problem, poetry or literature can pose that problem, which is also, I think, very important.
Mm. No, posing the problem, and also I think sometimes one poem, one song, one piece of lyrics can actually, become a movement. So the strength of the pen, and that too when it has a potent feeling with some rhythm and rhyme, it kind of sinks in within the minds of the people, and it tends to grow. You find people humming the same song,
Yes,
or
yes.
reciting Ghalib even
Yes,
today,
yes.
century after. Every occasion I go to, somebody or the other will come up with Ghalib, some sher.
Yes.
So I personally feel that what you're saying is correct, recording history, posing questions, and playing the role of a reformist. Yes, but also, poetry has not got its due place
Mhm.
in today's world.
Mhm.
And why do you think that is happening?
So I would say I'll explain it this way. Poetry was very popular when poetry was mostly religious all over India. But when the poetry became secular, it lost quite a bit of readership who were the religiously inclined people who were reading poetry as something religious. But what has happened now, the today's world, there are two types of readers of poetry. One is the lay reader, he reads it for the enjoyment of poetry. The other is a poet, people involved with poetry, they analyze poetry, discuss poetry. So there are the two groups of people. So the number of lay readers has come down, but I think the number of people of the second group, that is poets, poetry lovers, people who analyze poetry, discuss poetry, that is growing. So I would say that this is not a bad trend either for me, because this is also good that more people are more and more involved with poetry now. I think I'll put it that way.
Okay. At least they're discussing, at least they're
Discussing, yes,
appreciating.
yes, yes.
It's like having a larger viewership for a painting exhibition,
That's right,
or
right.
things
Right,
like that.
right,
A larger
absolutely.
audience for music.
Absolutely.
So at least there is appreciation.
Just appreciation.
Even
That
if
number is growing, to
growing.
my mind. Yes.
So I think the performers are not as many, but the audience is growing.
Yes.
कट ये क्या कर रहे हो आप? तो कट करो ना, बीच में खड़खड़ थोड़ा करोगे. As the okay. Action. थोड़ा खोलो, frame थोड़ा सा खोलो. और थोड़ा. Because he's very expressive with his hands are not good. This is fine. Roll please. As the founder member of the Poetry Society, someone who loves poetry, appreciates poetry, encourages poetry, what is it that you can do to motivate the youth of India to write more, read more poetry?
Actually, I think to my mind, the greatest achievement of ours in the Poetry Society has been to get younger generation involved with poetry. We have two schemes for that. One is running poetry workshops for school children. So that was started with support from the Ministry of Education, and we have 3 places chosen every year whenever funds were available, and we have workshops for school children.
Thoda right for the yes.
So in these workshops, what?
Cut. Yes.
So I was saying that for the workshop for school-going children, poetry workshop for school-going children, we used to get applications, inform the schools, headmasters of schools. They used to send poems, and ultimately from the entries, hundreds of entries received, we used to select about 30 to 40 children to join in a workshop. So we used to have a 3-day workshop to which the poets of that language, because we are having workshops in different languages. I think so far we have covered almost all languages of the country at different places. And
Frame खोल दो, पूरा frame खोल दो. पूरा और I don't want to miss out on his hands और थोड़ा बस leave it there. Yes, please.
So we used to get these children, about 30-40 of them, the school children, boys and girls, come together, attend a 3-day workshop. So we used to have the poems that they had written discussed. They used to be discussed by senior poets of that language. So they used to be told what is wrong with their poems or what is right, how they can improve the poems. At the end of it, they were asked to sort of revise the poems according to the advice they had been given. So that way, I think we could train about 30 children, 40 children in different languages. So we used to have about 3 workshops every year at one time in different languages. We had workshops in Bengali, Telugu, Urdu in Kashmir in the worst days of terrorism there. And in Orissa, we had several workshops. And like that, we have covered most of the languages. And I may be on record by saying that at least Oriya, which is I am aware of, some of the children who had come for the workshops, after about 15 years, the same children, some of them came as senior poets to tell the younger poets as to how to go about poetry. So I think that was a big achievement for us.
It speaks volumes about your achievement.
Right,
that
right.
means the seed that was sown has actually
It's grown.
turned
It has
into
actually
a tree.
grown to a tree. That's right.
Begun
Right.
to blossom,
Right,
which is a
right.
great achievement
Right,
of the
right.
Poetry Society.
And the other scheme that we had is to have a competition, poetry competition for school children. There also we used to get large number of entries, and we used to be analyzed here or with a jury and all that, and an award used to be given, and that scheme is still continuing. That was also another way of attracting children to write poetry and be involved with poetry. I think.
Why do you think it's so important to do that?